Man, I don't know where this one's going to go, but it's going to go somewhere. Overall, pretty good day. We're just going to get into it, kicking around some ideas, thinking back to some things we've discussed in the past, kind of finding some topics and words to define them better and maybe even explain them a little better. So here we go. One of the things I've been, I don't want to say, obsessed isn't the right word, but I've been preoccupied for a long time is when I was at my worst, one of the constant attitudes that would pop up were this what's the point attitude. And, I get a lot of, my spiritual insight from a lot of friends, just my own personal investigations here and there. Tons from my mom, and it's something she, I feel like, explores pretty fearlessly, and maybe not in any one. Well, that's for her to talk about. But anyway, and a long time ago, I had learned about these two concepts of one of them being like loving detachment, and this idea of like letting go, and I think there's probably a big category of that in the self-help world and the guru world. I think maybe even, it was popularized in the book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. But I think one of the challenges about, loving detachment, not giving a fuck, those two things seem at odds. But like letting go, serenity prayer kind of stuff, accepting the things you cannot change and all that stuff. There's a line that you can cross pretty quickly over into apathy. And I think this is an important distinction because I've been kind of trying to put more words and concepts to this. Apathy, defined lack of interest, enthusiasm, or concern. And I think even in some ways, apathy can be, there it sounds very passive. I think in some ways, it can be even proactive, like going out of your way to make sure it's known either to yourself or others that you don't like something, that something doesn't matter. Maybe a cousin to apathy is nihilism. And, nihilism is dangerous because it leads to this belief of meaninglessness. Anyway, I think, looking back on it, when I've been at my worst in my life, I find myself saying this phrase of what's the point a lot. And it's kind of like why I don't love the phrase, it is what it is. And sometimes I do like the phrase, it is what it is, because I think there is, if you kind of got if the engine's running well, and you kind of got everything in order, it is what it is just an acceptance, I think, of all the external things that you can't change and you can't impact, and you can certainly create all sorts of frustrating, unrealistic expectations around, some premeditated resentments around. But I think if you're in a good state of mind and good heart and good soul and good vibes, it is what it is just an acceptance of the flow, like I said. But again, going back to this point of what's the point? When I was at my worst, I found myself saying that a lot. I found myself saying that with training, especially when I was moving from a mindset of like my purpose to train is for physical dominance, is to win. And getting back to the reason I train is because I physically feel better. I'm healthier. I'm more equipped to enjoy life better. Just because it's not taken to this ultimate doesn't mean it lacks meaning. There is a point. And there's a point to things if you give them one. For me, that's a huge point. I think it's probably all too easy at times to step into that meaninglessness thought pattern because I'm so concerned for extrinsic or external validation. Bigger topic there. But it's a hard thing to get out of, and it's a hard mindset to get out of when you really get into it. And it's a hard mindset to get out of because you can just keep saying it. And I think if when you start to buy into it, it's like the little kid who just keeps asking why. And you're like, well, it's bright out because the sun is coming up. Why? Well, the sun generates a lot of light. Why? And it's just really easy to continue down that logic, that illogical path of, well, what's the point? And someone says, well, the point is because it can make you healthy. And you're like, yeah, well, what's the point of being healthy if I'm not winning the CrossFit Games? What's the point of being, what's the point of like working for something if I'm not going to be the absolute best at it? And this is not an excuse or a advertisement for mediocrity by any means, but or complacency by any means. I think what this is like a true acceptance of the things you cannot control and the things you can, your attitude, your effort, yourself internally. And maybe even in some ways it's hard to control those things, but you can have the most focus and attention to them. But I've had this in my mind for a really long time of what is this? What is this feeling? Like, how do you describe it? What is this word? And I came across an Instagram post, as I usually do, and get all of my best advice from. Because if you have problems in life, you should go to social media to solve it. It'll make things better. Or just watch AI Vader on Fortnite. The word I came across is Acedia. 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 And essentially this word is defined as a spiritual state characterized by apathetic listlessness, indifference, and a lack of concern or interest in spiritual or physical pursuit. And I think originally I haven't looked into this too much, just kind of been dipping my toe in the water, that this word really was focused at the concept of lack of desire for spiritual pursuit. I think forgot where I read this, probably on the internet. One philosopher basically said it's the, it's the sadness and the indifference that comes when we realize the burden, the spiritual burden, and necessity to be, in this they talked about saintliness, but to become good. But anyway, so a spiritual state characterized by apathetic listlessness, indifference, and a lack of concern or interest in spiritual or physical pursuit. And this is just right from the Googler. But it goes on to say this is often described as a form of spiritual sloth or the noonday demon associated with a feeling of weariness and discouragement. And the descriptions around this word, I think were really great. And kind of the more I've been reading into it a little bit, I find it very, very, very interesting. I've seen it listed as sorrow about spiritual good. But what really stuck out to me in the definition was just the concept of listlessness, just sort of, being, wayward, and not having any direction. You're without energy, and the lack of concern or interest. I think, it doesn't even really say that it's not even just about the action. It says you lack the concern or interest in spiritual or physical pursuits. And I thought this tied so well. It just stuck out to me because, like I said, I've thought about this what's the point mindset for so long, because it's pernicious and it's hard to escape when you latch onto it. And I don't think some of us have better defenses than others, but I don't think any of us are completely inoculated from it. And it can creep in for longer or shorter periods of time. But one of the things I think that came out of this that was really important for me was having purpose toward something intrinsic. Though I do think extrinsic motivations are important in life, and they can be very, very motivating, and they can be useful, and they can be healthy. But I think for this one, it was having purpose toward the intrinsic, and having intrinsic goals that you want to chase. I think for some people, this specifically could be spiritual or in service of a higher power or something like that. Or it could be, in service of some other very meaningful and intrinsic idea or entity that's important to you. But the reason I liked it is because when you have this attitude, when you have an attitude opposite of this concept of acedia, you're active toward an end. You're practicing a behavior where you're constantly moving forward. There's a goal of I don't want to say betterment, but there is just a goal of action and activity toward something potentially that it's not tangible, intrinsic, but it has a really long lifetime. Maybe even for some, I think in the spiritual, it's an infinite or eternal kind of lifetime. But then I was also looking at this word acedia, and I was looking at the origin of it, and it says it's from Greek, listlessness. Obviously, the prefix without, and then I don't speak Greek, but it's either kaidos or seidos, which means care, without care. And this reminded me and brought me back to this concept. And again, why I think when I've been at my worst and my lowest, and I've talked to friends who have been at their worst and their lowest, there's no one magic pill or a cure-all. But in some cases, when I've talked to them about this, or I've reflected on this with myself, one of the things that's helped move me forward, I won't say pull me out of it, and I won't speak for them to say it pulled them out of it, but finding care in even the smallest actions. And, the popularized concept of making the bed every day and, having crisp corners on it. I don't like to make the bed, and it's because I can't stand getting into a bed with tight sheets. It's just absolutely obnoxious. I admire the skill. So for me, it's other things. It's folding clothes the night before. It's how I lay things out in the morning. It's, certain rituals like that. I feel like I do have my own. The small actions of care I find immensely important. And I know we have busy lives and we don't always have time to do those things. But, habituating that care, I think is really, really, really important. Because then at points in your life when you say to yourself, well, I don't care, what's the point? You are immediately confronted by this fucking mountain of evidence of, the aggregation of marginal gains of a million small instances of care. Well, if I did this one small task I've done every day for the last 10 years with care, this next task every day for the last 10 years with care, this next task maybe slightly bigger every day for the last 5 years with care, I think it's a little bit more challenging. Like I said, you're not inoculated from it, but it's a little more challenging to be conquered by the noonday demon. And this is coming at it from a slightly secular sense, even though I think from a non-secular perspective, I think if you talk to anybody who is aware or practicing or devout in that way, they could speak to their activities and their rituals to combat Acedia, the noonday demon, noonday devil, very, very confidently. But that's where my head was at. I saw this word and it really got me thinking about this thing. And when I looked at the origin of the word, without care, it really made me think about hard. And I get it. You can't walk around and just, give everything the utmost care. But I think the more you can have small practices of care, the more likely you are to transfer that to medium practices with care. Like I said, I think it's the ritual of brushing the teeth. We've talked about this with fitness. And I talked about this in a podcast a long time ago. There's an art to everything, I believe. And sure, you could just rush and smash the toothbrush around in there. But there's also a way to do it well. And that small amount of care is a visible, though not very big, but a visible and tangible amount of evidence that shows you care about yourself, your well-being, your health. And that makes it easier to transfer to other things. So that's where my head was at over the last couple days, reflecting on that. It's fun to see when you have these feelings or thoughts toward yourselves or behaviors maybe you reflect on and you don't love, and kind of learning about how they've been crystallized and thought about elsewhere, and in some places propagated elsewhere, or when other people combat them. You learn a ton. So I'm going to dive into this one a little bit more. I'm going to keep reading about it. I really, really enjoyed thinking about it because, like I said, I think it's such a pitfall for us. Definitely has been for me in my life, because I found out when I was at my best, like I said, I was full of care and interest and curiosity and excitement to do something new. And the more I attached, again, I think a lot of external, motivation to things, the more I was able to slip into the what's the point mindset. So there it is. Creeping on 100. It's just taking a little bit to get there, but it's fun. All right. Thank you. Hope you like it. More tomorrow.